the incredibly talented Janos Stone with me here, Cambridge Creation Lab. And I'm delighted that I'm being able to speak with him and talk about his journey with shapes and understand how design works in his mind and learn from it. Janos, it's so delightful to have you with me here, and I'll jump straight into the questions. How do you say snowflake? Is it snowflake or how it's pronounced as SNOWFL?
Yep. Yeah, we call it snowflake. That's correct. Snowflake. That's what we were calling it.
Yeah. The A is missing, which is very beautiful. We'll talk about your project, which is a micro 3D printed barcode used to track luxury goods and artworks. With Snowflake, as you say, users are able to effectively protect their products or property from theft and forgery, thus saving millions in lost sales and insurance claims, which is very interesting. I am so interested to know more about this, and if I would like to know if the basic premise of form following function was working in your mind as you conceptualize this project.
So I can start off by saying, yeah, this was a project that I developed and ran a number of years ago, potentially 10 to 12 years ago. And while I was faculty at Northeastern University, it was a cross-disciplinary project that I directed where we were exploring the feasibility of micro-printed, essentially barcodes, which were physical objects that could be embedded into a variety of different goods, from biological pharmaceuticals to, as you say, luxury items. And the ability to counterfeit these would be pretty challenging, just in the fact that technology that's needed to produce them, as well as the materials and ability to use a physical object instead of something that is digital. We felt that in a sort of an ironic way, the ability to use something physical as a barcode prevented counterfeit and counterfeiters from being able to produce them as readily as hacking into something digital. So form versus function, I think actually in this case, functionality was more critical. We needed a way of embedding as much information as possible into a small space. So this kind of lattice structure or almost fractalization of the form became necessary in order to put the alphanumeric data into a small space. Although it is one of those wonderful moments where just by its virtue of the design, the object has an elegance and has a kind of a beauty to it. And this happens quite often, I find, when things are based off of natural forms.
Yeah, and it's so beautiful. It's like you don't even need to know what the project is, and you just get drawn just by the visuality of it. You don't even need to be like, yeah, so it's so beautiful. Now, I wanted to ask you also, as a side note, which I cannot escape, talking about your great-grandfather, the great Juliet Cabbage, who said in his the memoirs of the New Landscape, he said, I'm going to read that out. The obvious world that we know on gross levels of sight, sound, taste, and touch can be connected with the subtle world revealed by our scientific instruments and devices. I would like to know how you relate with this. I know you relate with it by your DNA, but how do you relate?
Well, I mean, I think that I find, if I'm understanding the question correctly, that the inherent sort of ability for us to sense and perceive the natural forms is one that works in a very minute level. You know, we're hypersensitive to it, and it is somewhat unavoidable just through daily life. And that this inherent understanding leads to a natural gravitation to forms that are derived from nature, such as certain types of organics or geometric shapes. And so this connectivity is just really unavoidable, and one that I find can be embraced both on a conscious and unconscious level when a person is designing, and ideally is something people are kind of mindful of and watchful for as they are designing. Yeah.
Yeah, I get it. Talking about your rhythm and shapes and silence and proportion. I love what you've done with your house project. And it's like this beautiful, wonderful world of silence in kind of like an isolated symmetry. And how did you get to this project? Like, how do you start thinking about it, visualizing it, and the incredible geometric freedom that is associated with this? You know, because um, I wish I was a child growing up, you know, and I could sneak into that little space. And so, how did you conceive it?
Well, in that case, as in many of the projects that I've worked on, I naturally develop a set of parameters to work inside of. I have spent time in studio without those parameters, working in a much more fluid mindset that just allowed anything to come up and be used as conceptual materials to develop artworks or design projects. Although with the Playhouse, it began as a project that really had an intention and a functionality that meant that it had to have baked in parameters in order for it to actually perform the job that it needed to. And so those were things such as it needed to be inexpensive to produce. It needed to be very lightweight. It needed to be something that could be assembled very quickly. And I find that if you start to add certain parameters to things, there's almost an inevitability of the formalization of the design. So although I made a number of different prototypes, the one that worked and ticked all the boxes best is the one that you see. And so again, back to the question you asked me before, it has to do with almost an evolutionary process where the design that performs the best and most correct to the functional needs of the task at hand is the one that's going to succeed.
Yeah, yeah. So do you have any anecdotes to narrate from your own child or other children's experiences where how they interact with the space, the lines, the forms, and the space that they get, and how they sneak out, they come out of it having mind pictures, and they start telling you stories, maybe, you know, like.
Yeah, children, so the size and the sort of large triangular open ends, when presented to children, they get it immediately. They understand it's built for them. They understand it's a space they want to go inside of and inhabit and really have ownership over. And so my experience and many people's experience of watching children use the house is that they approach it, they go in it, they go all around it, in and out of the boxes, and then they start to bring things into it. And they fill it with usually soft objects. And then they start to work on the outside where they'll hang things from it or they'll draw on it. And so the shape, I think the triangular shape, I think is incredibly appealing and really draws not just children, but parents and us grown-ups as well to it. And I really credit the proportions of it, as well as the use of the classic triangle, square, circle in again accessing and stimulating that inherent sort of understanding of nature that we all have.
Yeah. So coming to your platform, Shelving Project, this is beautiful. Like, I wish I had one at my home. Could you tell us more about, like, why did you think of a triangle first? I know you just spoke about the triangle, but why did you think of the triangle first and not a square or a circle? I know circles are hard to kind of like embrace on the wall. I love the brilliant manner in which they're stacked, creating an infinite structure, which again, in my mind, reminds me of Juliet Cabbage's gelatin and silver photo print titled Structure, which I'll share on the screen. So what was the reason you chose the triangle, and not other forms?
Oh, simply because that project is meant to be all about space saving and customization. The idea was that a person would buy a set of these triangles that would actually come in a square layout, and they could add and remove the triangles as need be, so that the shelf was very customizable. And of course, triangles can be nested and in a very efficient way. So it allowed for a range of shape and durability and structure. And also we felt provided a very beautiful kind of aesthetic as well.
Yeah, it is very beautiful. So what is the relationship that you've developed with these shapes, in terms of symbolism or even metaphors, maybe subconsciously, or when you are fusing different shapes, and rotating and translating and repeating and breaking repetitions, so describe your visual reasoning process. And does your reasoning include calculating, or do you allow your free imagination to redefine rules or break rules, or it's a mixture of both?
So when it comes to design work, there's not a lot of concept behind it, except for the need for the project to perform certain functions or multiple functions. I've often thought the difference between art and design really has to do with functionality, that a designed object is let's say it's a vessel that performs a function, and a conceptual art object is a vessel that contains an idea. And obviously there's overlap there, and certainly arguments to be made for swapping these definitions, but in general, I find that to be true. So when I'm designing something that is meant to perform a function like a shelf or a playhouse, the shapes really have to do with creating the most efficient
Mhm.
use case. And I think just inherently I gravitate towards triangles and squares because I find them to be very malleable building blocks. So yeah, I'd say it's a fairly simple, straightforward rationale.
Yeah. Okay. I have a different question. I'm a student of literature, so I have to ask this question because it's been there in my mind.
Okay.
Do you think of shapes when you are writing? Yeah, I know you write, and not necessarily visually, maybe allegorically. And W.B. Yeats, one of my favorite poets, his poetry is filled with like spirals and cones and spools. For instance, in his theater, The Only Jealousy of Emer is the musician's song concludes with a question. I'll read out the question. He says, how many centuries spent the sedentary soul in toils of measurement, beyond eagle or mole, beyond hearing or seeing or Archimedes' guess, to raise into being that loveliness? The spirals in geometry, the contours, the automatic writing, the imagination and design, they're weaving seamlessly in this poetry. So my question is, as a student of literature, what do you think of this kind of writing where you can visualize uh, what the person is writing? Not necessarily is writing about a square, but the approach is with shapes. It's with spirals. It's kind of building
Right.
unconscious shapes.
I think it's beautiful. I think it's very, very historical and quite ancient. My understanding is that the ancient Greeks would write their poems and adventures using words that not only beautifully and eloquently described objects, but also had a sort of a sense about them and a sound about them that mimicked the object themselves. In other words, as an example, if they were writing about a snake, there would be a description of the snake. The letters themselves would move up and down, and then the sounds themselves would mimic the sounds that a snake would make. So there's sort of a multi-layering that would happen. And I think that's a very sort of elegant and historic approach to it. I wish I could say I write that way. I don't. I think my writing is much more a function of need, and so really tends to not be as poetic and beautiful as all of that, but something to strive for, let's say.
Yeah, but I'm sure it might, when you write, maybe you don't see it, maybe other readers might see that shape, who knows, because I don't think Yeats was consciously trying to build those imageries and shapes. He was just writing as he felt it and as he visualized it very, very internally. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that kind of writing, maybe, from you. And in the project, yeah, just remembering when you contribute to that project, maybe that's when we will see the shapes coming out in beautiful allegories. So that's all I have to ask for now. But before I go, I wanted to ask you about your grandmother. I saw a beautiful quilt on your website. Is it a quilt? Was that a quilt that you had on your website of your grandmother? I'm forgetting right now.
A quilt.
Yeah, a rug, I think. A rug.
It may have been a rug. Does it have owls on it?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a design that she put together as a prototype for a rug manufacturer, I think back in the 50s, that unfortunately never went into production. So that's a that's a one-off, and it's too bad it never did, because I have to say I used it my entire childhood on my bedroom floor, and now my daughter has it on her floor, and it's still going strong. So it's
Maybe
too bad
her
it would
daughter
have
will have it, but it's beautiful. Like
been.
we didn't know that Juliet Cabbage was so artistic and so, so yeah.
Oh yeah, she worked, as many women and wives married to these folks worked under the shadow, unfortunately, and had her own voice and approach to art and design that was quite robust. Most people know her for the children's books, but there's quite a bit of textile work and even three-dimensional artworks that can still be found around in some playgrounds in Cambridge and a few other places. So certainly a creative in her own right.
Yeah. Can you recommend one playground where I can see it? Because I'm in Cambridge.
Yes, I'm afraid I don't know the name of it, but there is one in North Cambridge on Mass Ave, right before you get to the cross Route 16.
Okay.
On the right-hand side. So you could probably identify it from a map search.
Okay.
If
Yeah,
I can remember the name, I'll send it to you. But she has some bronze birds right there embedded in a wall.
Yeah, I'm going to look. But all the best for your future projects, and I'm going to keep in touch.
Thanks so much. Yeah, we'll talk soon.
Thank you.
All the best.
Take
Bye-bye.
care. Bye. Bye.